Hello Quarantographers, and welcome back to another edition of Quarantography. It is with a heavy heart that I am announcing the retirement of intro gags. They are just far too silly. I hope I don't get sued. Anyway, today's going to be less of a confident explainer and more of an exploratory exercise, and it's about fill light. Fill light is something that for me was very mysterious for a very long time and still isn't quite the easiest thing for me to think about. Partially because it's not the obvious part of your light. It is by definition the less important. It is like it's there to support your key light. And because of that, it remained a mystery for a long time. When I was first getting started, I was a little bit arrogant about the whole thing. I was very much of the opinion that fill light made your photos look cheap. It was for high school portraits. And that's absolutely not the case. I had this dumb impression in my head that my work didn't use fill because I had a moody aesthetic that was more serious. And if that's the way you're thinking about fill light, get over yourself and bring it in. Even a very subtle fill light can improve the quality of your photos in any number of ways. For example, going back to my mimicking sunlight tutorial, that aesthetic would not be possible without the color tension that exists between the key and the fill light. And if you want to have a natural looking light, the only way to make that happen is to have more than one color bouncing around your scene. So fill light is a great way to introduce a different color light if things are looking too studio-y. The complicated thing about fill light that I want to explore is the way it adds texture to your images. Because it's not the key light, because it is not the thing giving it overall shape, it's a little bit hard, a little bit tricky to figure out how it is affecting your image. But if you think back to my mimicking sunlight tutorial, you'll remember that I like to build my light from shadows to highlights, from fill to key. So as we go through this, I want you to note how things look when it's just the fill, because it's still in the image. I'm going to set my key to be a very off-axis light, so there's plenty of room in the shadows so you can see what the fill is doing. I want you to think about the fact that anywhere your key is not hitting, your fill light is lighting. So it matters whether your fill light is hard or soft. It matters whether your fill light is on axis or off axis. Your placement, the directionality, the size, the distance, all these things factor into your fill light and can dramatically affect the look of your final shot, even if you're not thinking about it. Now, because I have a greater access to a larger number of modifiers on my larger studio strobes, I'm going to be using those today. However, all of these principles still apply if you're using small flashes. Just stick them in an umbrella or bounce them off the ceiling. There's a lot of different ways to modify your light size. Without further ado, let's head to the studio and let's play with the fill. So in this exercise, I'm going to be using a black background and just two lights total, fill and key. Black background just because I want to keep there from being too much reflections. I'd like all the light in the scene to come from my lights. Here I'm testing out different angles. I probably want to see this as a 45-degree head angle. That way you can see all this shadowy area very clearly. I've decided that's about the angle I want. I'm gonna give myself a little headspace. And I'm removing my glasses because I don't want to make this a shooting glasses tutorial. That's not what this is about. So with just the key here, our shadows are very dark. This is a very moody image. I think you're going to see a lot more dimension come to these images when we start adding fill. So here I'm bringing in a little bit of negative fill. I'm in a small white room, so even with one light, I'm going to be getting a fair amount of fill. So this is just to counteract that a little bit. There we go, some very deep shadows happening now. So this is with absolutely no fill. Note how completely dark it goes on the camera right side of my face. And of course, this is a look to have in your toolkit. If this is the wrong you want to find, I say go for it. I just want to make sure you understand more than just this look. So the next thing I want to examine is a very simple white bounce fill. And just check out how much this opens up the right side of my face. Dramatic change there. This is what many photographers see as the default fill. If you've ever used a reflector, held it under someone's face outside or something like that, this is what you're doing. It's a very broad, even subtle fill. There's not a ton I want to describe about this because you don't have as much control over it. So we're back to baseline here, just the key. And just off camera right, I'm building a large Photech soft lighter. It's basically an Octabank, but with an umbrella base. And we're going to be using it as my large fill example. After turning off the key, here we have just the fill. That's a pretty reasonable, for a first, what is still going to be a contrasty look, that's a nice level for the shadows to be at. Notice where this is hitting, because that's the part that's going to be affected by the fill. I'm brightening it up here a little bit so you can get a sense. It's kind of in many ways the opposite light as the key. But pay attention to the shapes you're getting out of this, the shape of the light this is giving. I'd say to pay a special attention to the ear. It's a very complex shape and it's a great way to see the differences in light. So now that I have the base light down, I'm going to take with both the fill and key. And as you can see, it's fairly similar to the white bounce board option. But as you can see, all of this detail here is layered onto the finished image. Next, I'm moving the fill behind me so you can see the effect that has. Turning off a key. Here you're going to see what the fill looks like when it's actually touching 0% of my face where the key is. In this case, the key and fill are completely different lights. Here you can really see the kind of shape this is taking. Because it's coming from behind, you see the reflectance on my skin that you wouldn't get when it was on the front. That's fill only, finished image, fill only, finished image. So now I've returned to a frontal fill, except I've made that fill light a hard light. You can't see it as just at a frame, but it's a reflector only light. You can already see it's got harsher highlights and shadows. If you once again look at the ear area, you can see it's casting some very sharp shadows, and there are even some shiny highlights in that area. Turning the key back on, and here's how that looks. I've noticed that with a hard light fill, the effect can be somewhat more 3D almost. I very much like the effect of a hard light fill. Because the highlights are shinier and the shadows are deeper, it adds this extra texture to the image that you don't necessarily get when you're using a soft light fill. That's the soft light fill on the left and the hard light fill on the right. As you can see, it's a very similar image, but there is something very subtly different about both of them. Now we're going to try it with a hard light fill from the rear. You can see even less of the front of my face is illuminated here. And it's actually covering very little of the front of my ear, so that's going to be different. Yeah, you can see there's basically a black hole in the center of my ear because the fill isn't covering it all. So that's soft light fill left, and a hard rear fill on the right. Now I've put up the umbrella fill from behind, that's on the left, and the hard rear fill on the right. So the last kind of fill I want to talk about here is a very unique and sometimes difficult to work with, but very helpful fill, and that's what's called an on-axis fill. What we mean by on-axis is that the light is coming from the same position as the camera's lens. Now when that's a key, that's often considered a no-no, because think of an on-camera flash. The light is right above the lens, and that can cause very harsh shadows. If it's a soft one like here, however, what happens is it fills in every shadow that the lens can possibly see. It's almost as if the lens itself is casting the light. So what it creates is a very even fill. And that can be very useful for when you really want your fill to be very general. It just kind of brings up the light in every direction. However, it also has a little bit of a 3D effect because the skin will generally reflect light directly back at the camera. It's a little bit harsh like that. So what you'll notice with this particular brand of fill, that's a left fill on the left and an on-axis soft on the right, is there's a little bit more of that 3D effect that we got with the harsh light fill from before. And now if we take that soft on-axis fill and replace it with a hard on-axis fill, that's when we really get more of that 3D effect. Picture once again your on-camera flash, that really harsh light. Because we're relegating that harsh light to the shadows of the image, they really don't overly modify the effect that the key light has. These harsh highlights and shadows are really more of a layer in the image. They're layered on top of the shadows and highlights cast by the key light. So the effect is really just this extra texture. So there you have it, my completely unscientific, noodly, feelings-based exploration of fill light. I hope it wasn't too arcane, I hope you got something out of it, and I hope to see you guys experimenting. Now is a really good time to be practicing those kind of fiddly bits of theory that it's easy to go along with as good enough in your everyday shooting. But right now we have nothing but time. We should be taking this moment to really understand what makes our photos tick on a very detailed, nuanced level. I'd love to see your experiments. Patreon members have access to a really wonderful Discord where we can discuss what makes your photos tick specifically. I'm also going to be uploading full-res, side-by-side images of all of these examples for Patreon subscribers of any level. I'd love to see you there, so definitely check that out, patreon.com/Quarantography. Please leave your feedback, I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching with me. As ever, stay safe, stay sane, stay inside, and keep shooting. Mwah.